The first ever car, Carl Benz's motorwagen, hit the roads in 1885, forever changing the way we move. But did you know this car, the motorwagen, could reach a whopping top speed of 10 miles per hour? It's hard to believe how far we've come from those humble beginnings. So, let's go back to 1885 when this German engineer named Carl Benz introduced the motorwagen. It's often considered as the very first real automobile in the world. The motorwagen, fueled by gasoline and powered by an internal combustion engine, was the starting point of a transportation revolution. Benz's invention really paved the way for the development of cars all around the world. But it wasn't just Germany. Inventors all over the world were really excited about the idea of motorized transportation. Did you know that back in 1888, Bertha Benz, who was Carl's wife, actually took the motorwagen on a really long trip? It was a pretty big deal because it showed everyone just how useful cars could be for everyday life. This event really caught the public's attention and set the stage for the automotive industry as we know it today. The Benz patent motorwagen was a three-wheeled car with an engine in the back. The car had a lot of new inventions in it. Steel tubing and woodwork pieces were used to build it. Benz designed the wheels with steel spokes and the thick rubber tires. The unsprung front wheel could be turned with the help of a rack with teeth. In the back, fully circular springs were used, and both sides had a live axle and chain drive. A simple belt system changed the power between an open disc and a drive disc, making the transmission work at a single speed. Bertha Benz, who was married to Carl, chose a unique way to get the word out about the patent motorwagen. She took patent motorwagen on the first long-distance automobile road trip, supposedly without telling her husband, to show that it could be used to travel long distances. In early August 1888, the businesswoman took her 15-year-old son Eugen and 14-year-old son Richard on a trip from Mannheim to her mother's hometown of Pforzheim. They went through Heidelberg and Wiesloch, where she bought Ligroin at the city pharmacy, making it the first gas station in history. She got more gas at the Wiesloch pharmacy, and when the brakes stopped working, Benz asked a nearby seamstress to nail leather to the brake blocks. This is how brake lining was created. She sent her husband a telegram telling him that she had arrived in Pforzheim, then went to her mother's house for the night and came back home 3 days later. The trip was 194 kilometers long in total. As the 19th century ended and the 20th began, there was a flood of new ideas in the car world. Visionaries and early adopters came forward and helped cars progress. In the meantime, Henry Ford's assembly line changed the way things were made in America, making cars cheaper and easier for most people to get. By the early 1900s, there were a lot of different styles of cars, from fancy luxury cars to more useful cars for everyday use. Companies were competing to come up with the best new ideas in terms of speed, design, and usefulness. In the 1920s, the automotive industry was really booming. It was a clear reflection of the changes happening in society and the economic prosperity of the era. It was such a fabulous time, full of style, speed, and sophistication. During this time, cars went from being just a way to get around to becoming symbols of status and luxury. So when cars started being mass-produced, it totally changed things for a lot of people. More folks could afford to have their own car, which had a big impact on society. It actually helped create a middle class and caused a major change in how people lived their lives. During this exciting time in the automotive world, there were some amazing innovations that made driving even better. Things like hydraulic brakes, electric starters, and improved suspension systems were introduced, making cars safer, easier to use. It was a real game changer for drivers. Automobiles had been made since the 1880s, but until the Model T came out in 1908, they were hard to find, expensive, and not always dependable. The Model T was a big hit because it was marketed as a safe, easy-to-maintain car for the masses. Just a few days after it came out, 15,000 orders were made. On September 27, 1908, the first Model T that was meant to be sold left the Ford Piquette Avenue plant in Detroit, Michigan. It had been built on August 12, 1908. 19 years later, Henry Ford saw the 15 millionth Model T Ford roll off the line at his plant in Highland Park, Michigan, on May 26, 1927. Between starting the company in 1903 and releasing the Model T, Henry Ford came up with ideas for a number of cars. Ford's very first car was called the Model A, and he named all of his other cars after letters, all the way up to the Model T. There were not that many types made. Before the Model T, the company was making the Model S, which was an improved version of the Model N, which had been their biggest hit up to that point. Instead of the Model U, the next Ford Model A came after the Model T. The company said this was because the new car was so different from the old one that Ford wanted to start over with the letter A. Ford's first mass-produced car for the middle class, the Model T, was made on moving production lines with parts that could be switched out. Even though Ransom E. Olds is credited with creating the assembly line and making the first mass-produced car, the Oldsmobile Curved Dash in 1901, Ford and his engineers are mostly to appreciate for the huge improvements in the system's efficiency during the Model T's lifetime. When Charles Rolls and Henry Royce started this British brand in 1904, they didn't just make cars, they also made it a symbol of unmatched luxury and skill. Rolls-Royce wanted to change the way people thought about greatness in cars, and boy did they succeed. People called the Silver Ghost the best car in the world when it came out in 1907. They were right, the Silver Ghost made Rolls-Royce the most luxurious and classy car brand. Its engine was so quiet and the ride was so smooth that a champagne glass could be put on the hood and not spill a drop. But it wasn't just about having nice seats and a nice atmosphere. Rolls-Royce was on the cutting edge of new tech. In the R series, they released the world's first V12 engine in 1912. It set a standard for power and speed that other companies had a hard time matching. Quite literally, Rolls-Royce changed gears during the rough years of World War I. Some of the most famous planes of the war were powered by their aero engines, which solidified their reputation for precise engineering and dependability in harsh circumstances. Rolls-Royce changed with the times by making the Phantom line during the years between the two world wars. Elite and aristocratic people all over the world bought these beautiful cars because they mixed cutting-edge technology with classic style. But Rolls-Royce wasn't just for rich people who wanted to live in style. When the Rolls-Royce new Phantom came out in 1925, the company expanded its offerings. This type became known as the doctor's car because it was so popular with doctors. Click on this video for a detailed analysis on the history of Rolls-Royce.